Welcome to Fierce Freedom. We are coming to you live today from the National Press Club studios in Washington, D.C. In just a few minutes, we'll be hearing from the Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis. Right now, I'm joined in the studio by two of my friends, BJC board member T. Body and BJC General Counsel Holly Holman. And we'll have other members of the BJC community on set later in the show. If you want to view a schedule for today's program, use your phone to scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen, or you can visit our website at bjconline.org/fiercefreedom. I hope you'll join the conversation today on social media. Use the hashtag #FierceFreedom and tag us at BJC on the Hill on Twitter and Instagram. We'll be sharing some of your reactions later in the program. BJC advocates for faith freedom for all. We come at our work from a Baptist Christian perspective, and our community includes those with a variety of spiritual beliefs. Our work is in the courts, with Congress, in educating others, and in helping you make a difference in your community. We couldn't host this program without the support of many generous people. Thank you to everyone at any donation level who sponsored our program. We want to note the generosity of some people and partners who have helped us make this event possible. Our event sponsors are Mark Wiggs, Kenneth Myers, Ryan LaPrade, Holly Holman and Jay Smith, Dan and Rhonda Hamill, Reba Cobb, Hal and Mitzi Bass, Fellowship Southwest, First Baptist Church, Washington, D.C., Lakeshore Baptist Church, Oakland, California, Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University, Wilshire Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. Cynthia Holmes gave generously as our speaker sponsor. And I want to give a very special thank you to Jackie Baugh Moore and the Eula May and John Baugh Foundation for their very generous gift, and to Patsy Ayers, whose very generous donation truly helped ensure the success of today's event. And for those of you who gave at the 85th anniversary level or above, you can join us for a special post-event program. If you want to join, it's not too late. You can make a gift by visiting bjconline.org/fiercefreedom. Now, I want to welcome my friend and BJC board member, Reverend Dr. Timothy T. Body, who serves as a social justice church engagement consultant at Sojourners. He's also the immediate past General Secretary of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. Welcome, T.
Thank you, Amanda. This year, BJC is celebrating 85 years of working for faith, freedom for everyone. I'm a proud fourth-generation Baptist minister who was named for not one but two Baptist preachers. As we say in my family, I'm Baptist born and Baptist bred, and when I die, I'll be Baptist dead. But in the Catholic tradition, I must admit I have a small confession to make. Before my family and I moved from Atlanta to Washington 6 years ago, I had never heard of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Now, as good in Baptist as I am, I'm not sure why that is. But when I served as General Secretary of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, one of BJC's member bodies, I'm sure glad that I was introduced to this very fine organization, because there I learned that the BJC has been fighting for everyone's right to worship as they please or not for decades, recognizing that, in the words of BJC, a threat to anyone's religious liberty is a threat to everyone's religious liberty. As my friend and brother, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, now a U.S. Senator from the great state of Georgia, has said, the Black church was born fighting for freedom. And I would add to that, the Black Baptist Church has led the fight for freedom. In the context of BJC's 85th anniversary, and as we celebrate Juneteenth today, I'm excited to be a part of BJC's special project on race and religious freedom, which we hope will help BJC and the world better understand and communicate how this idea of religious liberty intersects with race, creed, and denomination. So for BJC, the focus now is not so much on our past, as wonderful as it has been, but on our future. As we look forward to our centennial celebration in just 15 more years, our theme for the 85th anniversary is this: moving faith freedom forward, as we seek to be a more inclusive organization that truly focuses on extending and protecting religious liberty for all. And now, I want to send things over to Holly Holman, who serves as BJC's General Counsel. Holly?
Thanks, T. I have the honor of introducing you to our featured speaker today. The Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis is an author, activist, preacher, and public theologian. She serves as the senior minister at Middle Collegiate Church, a 1,400-member, multiracial, welcoming, and inclusive congregation in New York City. Ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, Dr. Lewis is the first African-American and first woman senior minister in the Collegiate Church of New York, which was founded in 1628. Dr. Lewis is a fierce advocate for racial equality, economic justice, and LGBTQIA equality. Middle Church and her activism have been featured prominently in national media outlets. Just last weekend, readers of the New York Times Magazine saw a stunning photograph of Dr. Lewis standing in the ruins of her church's sanctuary, which was devastated by fire in December. For me, that image evoked both the painful difficulty and the necessary hopefulness of facing this moment in our country's history. Dr. Lewis earned her Master of Divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary and earned a Master of Philosophy and a PhD in Psychology and Religion from Drew University. She's been an adjunct professor at seminaries across the country. Dr. Lewis brings her devotion, clarity, and energy to everything she does, including her new podcast called Love Period that was released last month. Her latest book, Fierce Love, will be released later this year. We look forward to reading it, and we are delighted to hear from her today. Dr. Lewis, welcome.
Friends, I'm honored to be with you, and I'm slightly harried today. It's Friday, and in a week from now, I'll be heading on sabbatical to do a study. I'm grateful for the Louisville Institute for grant that allows me to travel to North and South Carolina, to Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, to do a study on Black folks' religion and how the theologies of resistance and resilience and joy of Black folks in America had something to do with disrupting white supremacy and creating fierce freedom in the South, and a civil rights movement, a Southern freedom movement, Mama Ruby Sales would say, that changed the landscape in America. What is that? What was that religion about? What were the theologies? What were the ethics that caused a disruption in white supremacy? At the same time, as in what we might call religious freedom, there was an interpretation of our book, the scriptures, the gospel of Jesus, the teachings of Rabbi Jesus, that spawned the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, that spawned lynchings. How is it that this text both led to the resistance and also led to oppression? So this is the study I'm doing in a week. And I say that to say, when I get in the car a week from now, I'll be leaving behind my charred remains of my building, and I'll be leaving behind an architect beginning to help us to think about rebuilding. I'll be leaving behind my colleagues who are thinking about finance, and I will be leaving behind my grandchildren for a few weeks. I am harried, y'all, is what I'm saying. I'm just thrilled to have a moment to reflect with you, though, on fierce freedom, and looking so forward to my conversation with my colleagues about said text. And this is, I've been thinking a little bit about what it means for us to live justly on the way to fierce freedom and to choose fairness and equality every day. So please say a prayer with me, that the words of my mouth, though this is not a sermon, and the meditations of all of our hearts will be acceptable in your sight. God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Power correcting everything that stands against love. So when I think about making my way to Mississippi and to my mom's roots in Louisville and my dad's roots in Meridian, I'm thinking about being a small child and having nothing more delightful to do than to fly through the air on the swing set, then to get off, wash my hands, and then watch my mom doing all the things. Watch her tending to my scarred knee, pulling the glass out because I was rough and would fall off and on, find the one piece of glass and fall on it. I watched her wash her hands and prepare dinner, stick her hands in the flour to make biscuits, to use the same flour to make gravy for the roast beef or the chicken. I loved watching her get dressed and putting the pink rollers in her hair at night and pulling them out in the morning, fluffing her curls. I loved watching her almond-shaped eyes and her high cheekbones, the kinds of ways Black folks in Mississippi look because of the mixing of Indigenous folks and Black folks. I loved watching her in the kitchen. I loved watching her put us to bed. I loved watching her watch the world. When she watched the world, I watched her and took cues in for what it meant to be a human, a good human, a person. Mommy, who was Baptist and who sang in the choir with Fannie Lou Hamer. I watched her make soup for sick neighbors. I watched her stretch the food on our dinner table for that latchkey kid named Ricardo who didn't have enough on the table to eat. I watched her teach me that when that little girl named Lisa called me the N-word for the first time, that meant Lisa was silly, not evil, silly, to imagine that her whiteness made her better than my Blackness. I watched her as she prayed on her knees every day and taught us to do the same, listing all the folks, my dear Mama Gert, Uncle George, Uncle Willie, Aunt Willie Mae. There were lots of Willies in my family. I watched her watch the news. Her and Walter Cronkite making meaning of the day. Black girls killed in a church, kids protesting on a campus. Emmett Till. All the stories, Dr. King's assassination. Everything that happened that I saw her watch in the world helped me to take in, to interject, if you will, her sense of what was right, what was wrong, what was just, what was fair, what was good. She taught me what fierce love is. Jack, we don't call people names, even if they call us names. But Mommy, she called me the N-word. Yeah, but we don't use the word cracker. That's not how we talk. Mommy, Lisa was pulling my pigtails. Yeah, well, turn the other cheek. That until the fourth time Lisa pulled my pigtails and chased me into my backyard, in which case Mom said, you better go out there and learn how to stand up for yourself. And somehow, having taken in the things she taught me, the way I confronted the girl who took my pop bottle money, as I said, I don't want to fight you, but I better go back home with something or I'm going to get a spanking. So how about if you and I split the money? And we did. And went and got a candy bar and a pop and shared it. I sometimes miss my mother so much as a window to the world and also as a sounding board. She died 4 years ago. And in these excruciating times where just because our nation is opening up from COVID and the sort of vestiges of the loneliness, the heartbreak, the deaths, the fear, I miss having a chance to sort of tell her all the things I'm grieving. That I'm grieving that there were lies about how many bodies were dead. I'm grieving that an insurrection on January 6th can begin to be discussed almost like it was a peaceful protest. I'm grieving the loss of my church to fire. I'm grieving the way words can cause Black people to beat down Asian aunties. We who have been oppressed, oppressing others. I'm grieving that even though Derek Chauvin was convicted of killing George Floyd, if you Google Black man dead at the hands of the police, so many names come up, it's hard to count them. The stories just don't all make the news. If Mommy were here, I would tell her how damn tired I am of living in a country that treats Black grief as a threat and white rage almost as a sacrament. For example, I've protested a lot in DC. One time in the Capitol cafeteria, lying on the floor, standing up for the value of Black lives. When the Capitol Police come to tell you to get up and they give you the first warning, you're like, I'm looking at shiny Black boots right next to my face, and I'm horrified and terrified that I might not move fast enough because I know that my Black life is seen as dangerous, as violent, as other by white police and Black police. I'm not gonna get the doors open for me and a bye, come on in, and here's a bottle of water. The kinds of things that happen to young men with rifles, for example. In the immediate aftermath, after the insurrection at the Capitol, there were so many commentators across news channels, progressive, conservative, who said, this is not who we are. Well, that's not true. It is precisely who we are. We are a nation built on violence. We are a nation built on stolen land by stolen bodies. We are a nation in which racism is so woven in the fabric of our democracy, it's hard to pull them apart. I love in these times of conversations, you know, we're on the way into the July 4th holiday. And here we are, Juneteenth, and we're celebrating that the Congress has passed this Juneteenth holiday to be a national one. But isn't it true that as we have this symbolic holiday, that Black incarceration rates, Black mortality rates, Black poverty, all of these numbers eclipse white numbers by multiplied accounts. Black wealth is 1/13 of white wealth. Isn't it true that you can get a longer sentence for a little gram of cocaine than the white collar commensurate crime? I mean, isn't it really true that over and over again, Black housing, Black schools, our children don't have computers and good books because schools are districts based on economics, based on where people live? Isn't it just really true that we have not overcome, we are not liberated, we are not free? And the same electeds who will vote for the Juneteenth holiday to become federalized will vote against changing policies to respect trans folks, to respect women's rights to choose, to respect Black people, to change the way our economy works. They'll vote to erode voting rights. They'll vote to put justices on the Supreme Court who will roll back, who will gut civil rights legislation. We ain't free. And not any of us is free as long as Black folks are not free. The sad thing about white supremacy is that it actually shackles all of us to fear, to inequality, to shame, to injustice. White rage is what put the knee on George Floyd's neck. White rage is what puts white supremacy on the necks of all people of color, all who are not normative, queer folks, Black folks, trans folks, Asians, Latinx, Indigenous. Jews, in our Christian love, and Muslims are oppressed by the ways white supremacy and Christianity are too often interlaced. Our parents, my mom, bore witness to Jim Crow, to walking past the school to the color school, to averting the eyes of the white boss. We have all witnessed the permanent, intractable ways that white supremacy limits the freedoms of all of us. Rocks thrown at children integrating schools. Those children sitting at the lunch counter with pop bottles and ketchup bottles crashed over their heads and cigarettes on their neck. I mean, what? Why? Why so much rage directed at Blackness? White rage gave rise to the Klan in the middle of the church. It sent people right out of worship to sit around on lawns and have picnics and watch strange fruit hang from southern trees. White churchgoers joined up in citizens' councils and burned down Tulsa, burned down Wilmington, led riots against any place where Black folks were thriving. White rage still cries foul when Black students get into Ivy League schools. White rage spread the suspicion about the legitimacy of the president with a Muslim name. White rage turns violent when trans and queer people dare to walk down the street in joyful freedom. When chants of Black Lives Matter are met with chants of no white lives matter or all lives matter or blue lives matter, that's the gentle, soft white rage folding into the inability to just look straight on at the church's collusion in anti-Black racism. I'm talking about the church's collusion to church people because I'm an insider and I love the church. But I think too many of us are afraid to name the way progressive Christianity and conservative Christianity are too often pitted against each other, but not allied on disrupting racism. I'm grieving as a Black person the impotence of our religiosity. I'm grieving as a Black person how many white clergy colleagues say sincerely that they don't believe Jesus was for justice. Really? How is that possible? I'm grieving as a Black person how many clergy colleagues are afraid to talk politics from the pulpit as though Jesus himself wasn't political. It's political to feed people on the mountainside. It's political to offer free healthcare to lepers and blind and lame. It's political to center women in a culture where they're not centered, to center children when they were viewed as little more than chattel. It's political to cross the border, to cross the boundaries, to make the Good Samaritan a star in your story about love. It's political to have an argument, a date with a Canaanite woman, an outside woman. First, you're talking to her. Secondly, she's kind of like fussing at you. And third, Jesus, who is culturally bound enough, hear me, to call her basically a dog, is revolutionary enough to then let her change his mind Even the dogs are entitled to the crumbs from the master's table. Fierce freedom is to follow in the way of the Afro-Semitic pobrecito, the poor one, born in Bethlehem, where the cows eat, raised in Nazareth, which is Palestine, raised in a place where, quote, nothing good comes from, an outsider to empire, an Afro-Semitic mixed race, brown, maybe even Black, at once homeless, at once refugee, outsider. To follow in the way of that one is to follow in the narrow place, through the narrow place, let's say, through the eye of the needle, through the gate that sloughs off for us any sense of privilege and power, except the kind that comes from being last, except the kind that comes from standing in solidarity with the people who Jesus stood in solidarity with. The outsiders, the disenfranchised, the tax collectors, the women, the sinners. True religious freedom, fierce freedom, is the freedom to speak that kind of truth to power, that some of what the church, we who are church people, have constructed look more like empire than the reign of God. Look more like the institutions we're called to critique than the new, free, loving, generous, radically ethical, front forward institutions that Jesus would create were he here. What would Jesus do in the context of fierce love and fierce freedom? How would he respond to queer people? It's Pride Month while we're having this conversation. And the suicide rate among trans teens is shocking. The ways our culture responds to what it doesn't understand about trans people is to think about how to make legislation to make their life untenable, to withhold medicine for people who need to transition, to be them full selves, to think more about who's gonna win a football or basketball game than the way a child could be living into their honest, authentic selves. It's Pride Month, and in too many places of the church, we still are homophobic. In the secret places and in the public spaces, where our people hear from us what Christianity means and think about abomination. And Jesus never said a word about gay. And are we comfortable doing exegetical work to discover, to uncover, to push back on, to dismantle even the text, the 7 or so texts out of all the biblical texts, the texts that are right inside the Levitical laws, where we who love some spandex and some poly cotton and some mixed fabric to hold us in and stand us up, we who will have shrimp cocktail, we who will have a cheeseburger, cheese and burger, all of those texts are right together. And we have made our theologies on crushing the souls of queer people. Why? On the way to Juneteenth as a Black woman, when I think about all of the ways, the ongoing ways that my Black brothers and my Black dad and my children, my nephews, my friends, all of the ways, all of the myriad, millions of ways that Blackness is loathed, from the microaggressions of being left off of emails, not being promoted, expressing yourself in the workplace as honestly as you can, sounds like you're angry and cranky, sounds like you're not a team player. All of the ways the economy was not meant to help Black families survive and thrive and grow, housing policies, tax policies. Read the Some of Us, not designed for justice. All of the ways that Black people even don't like Black people, expect less from Black people, think light is better in Black people because it's closer to white in Black people. All of the ways that we are not liberated in this 21st century, because the church, our religion, doesn't free us to fully critique those realities on the national stage and in our congregations. Oh my God, I'm dreaming of freedom. I wish my mom was here to talk about what freedom would look like. To imagine that we are the ones we've been waiting for. We're the ones to write a new story together. All this crazy talk about critical race theory and the ways that some of us are trying to figure out how to talk about this without calling it that. Our children are watching and listening. Don't you dream of a world? I do, where children are being taught in Sunday school, not, by the way, with Bibles that only look like Jesus looks like a white cartoon character. But what would happen if our children were being taught in Sunday school that to be a person of faith is to love all the people, really? And that doesn't mean like a theory, but it means actually practically lived out. That we disrupt anti-Semitism because Jesus was a Jew. That we disrupt anti-Islamic sentiment because God speaks more than one language. That we disrupt racism because God is on the side of all of us, including Black lives, that God sent a mixed race, brown, Black person enfleshed in the world to teach the world about love. What if we make it an essential nature of the way we do church, do faith, do catechism, do religiosity, that we build in this disruption of white supremacy by the songs we sing, by the worship we do, by the books we read, by the stories we tell, by the way we live our lives, so that our children's children's children inherit an America where they laugh about how racist it used to be here. What happens if we grow fierce courage so that telling the story of anti-racism from our pulpits and in our classrooms and in our small groups is rewarded by increase in pay and increase in offering and growth of church? When I inherited Middle Collegiate Church 17 years ago, we were a 400-member church, mostly white, but with some Black folks and a couple of Latinx folks and like one Asian person named Gloria. And when I came to the pulpit for the first time, it was a King Day, and I was preaching to this congregation, and I looked out there and I was like, oh my God, this looks like the reign of God. Because outside of the Air Force, where I grew up, I had never seen that much mixture, if you will, in the church. That 11 o'clock is still the most segregated hour in America. We know to be true, but oh my gosh, I could see the potential, I could feel it. When Trayvon Martin got killed, I told my board, and they accepted, being a multi-ethnic, multiracial church was no longer acceptable. No, we needed to be anti-racist in everything we did. All of the policies, all of the procedures, all of the programming, all of the work. We put together a one-year-long racial healing task force. Some 70 people would just meet and read and talk and bake bread and go see the Jim Baldwin movie and read some Zora Neale Hurston and open our eyes and our minds. Now today, we are a 1,600 member church with members from across the globe. And I believe the people came, 350 of them joining in the time of COVID, not because, I don't know, it's good to be popular, but because there was something in the message and something in the walking of the talk about anti-racism in this moment that folks understand and gravitate to this is the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. 6,000 people came to our anti-racism trainings because they know that anti-racism has to be a part of our faith. By the time I was 5 years old, friends, I had watched my mom some 1,825 times, showing me what love looked like, telling me that Fannie Lou Hamer and my Uncle George, who were working for voting rights, were not heroes, they were normal folks doing their stuff as Christians. Don't you want our children to think it's just normal stuff as Christians to dismantle racism everywhere we see it? That's what I think fierce freedom looks like. The freedom to, in our lives of faith, put faith and politics together to create on earth, as it is in heaven, the reign of God, in which everyone is loved, everyone is well, everyone is whole, everyone has enough, all bodies matter, and in which the matter of Black lives becomes such a priority that it disrupts white supremacy in all of its tentacles, and all of us thereby are more free. I'm dreaming a world where my job as a faith leader is to speak truth to power, and for power to be, as Dr. King said, justice standing against anything that Blacks love. Power that corrects anything that stands against love. I want us to be free to do that.
It wasn't just the U.S. Capitol that was violently raided on January 6th. The will of the American people came under siege by the insurrectionists, many of whom cloaked their indefensible actions in Jesus' name while they carried symbols of Christian nationalism. My work leading BJC has become even more urgent since the attack on our democracy and on my city. Protecting freedom will take all of us, a broad and diverse network of people, standing up for faith freedom from our unique perspectives, drawing on our personal experiences, and doing so from wherever we live, work, and serve.
Protecting faith freedom for all doesn't just include other Christian groups, but standing up for other religious groups and people who don't follow any religious practice.
I'm thinking right now about February 10th of 1964, when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed and African Americans looked as though they had a future and a hope. 8 days later, this church was bombed because of its commitment to social freedom, political freedom, religious freedom here in this community. When I think about the 6th anniversary of Mother Emanuel Church, I think about how fragile freedom is, but we continue to fight for it, hold on to it, because it is important. Regardless of bombs or regardless of guns, we're committed to freedom.
In rural communities like my own, we respect the American flag. In preparation for Easter, we had a heated conversation about the presence of the flag in the worship space. Hard conversations happen, but we recognize without them, we dilute the gospel message when we are more focused on the presence of a flag than the gospel being preached.
I'm in the hills of Oakland, California, overlooking San Francisco Bay. Oakland is a beautiful, diverse city, a sanctuary city where people come from all over the world seeking refuge and home. When unjust laws, like a Muslim ban, cause friends, neighbors, colleagues in the Interfaith Council of Alameda County to live in fear, BJC is there to stand for faith, freedom for all.
I confess that when I first heard of BJC, I was fine until I learned that the B stood for Baptist. I came with assumptions, nearly all of them misguided. BJC invited me, a woman of Jewish faith, into a working partnership for those of us who embrace the Abrahamic faiths, To those who hold a variety of faith practices and those who choose to express their human seeking in other ways, BJC's visionary work moving faith freedom forward is vitally important.
So many lives intersecting, so many nationalities and religions. Here, as First Baptist Church, we have joined with Worcester Interfaith and so many other congregations to work to ensure equity and justice for all of our students and their parents.
Una de las más grandes bendiciones que recibí al llegar como un inmigrante a los Estados Unidos fue tener el derecho de hablarle sin miedo las verdades al poder de turno, ejerciendo así el papel profético. Como pastor latino, sé que puedo abogar a favor de asuntos morales y políticos, pero sin tener que decirle a nuestra gente por quién votar. Mantengámoslo así.
Central Seminary has a deep historic relationship with the diverse peoples of Myanmar. Our partners and alumni there know firsthand the oppression of colonialism, the harsh persecution of dictatorship, and now the increasing violence since the military coup on February 1st. And as we commit to moving faith freedom forward, we must not forget the oppressed in places like Myanmar.
A key element to truly embracing religious liberty for all in these United States is understanding whose land we are truly on. I come to you from the traditional lands of the Lenni Lenape people, and I hope you know your land as well.
Before I even knew what faith freedom was, my faith has been my freedom to just be a Black woman in America. I believe while I'm on this earth, it's my responsibility to ensure that others have that same freedom, no matter their faith.
Let's continue to put a spotlight on religious liberty in all its many intersections, including racial justice. Because just as our faith work cannot be separated from anti-racism work, neither can our faith freedom work be separated from it. It's all connected.
During the Civil War, formerly enslaved people were called contrabands of war as they sought refuge here in the city of Alexandria, Virginia. Many lie here unnamed in Freedmen's Cemetery. Moving faith, freedom forward for all is imagining a world where people are unapologetically committed to ending racial and religious discrimination so that all human beings can experience the fullness of freedom in this life and not simply the next.
People were bought and sold at a slave market here in the center of Fayetteville, North Carolina. Families were torn apart and freedom was denied to our Black brothers and sisters. And just last year, this town witnessed one of its own, George Floyd, murdered on video by a police officer in Minnesota. Landmarks remind us of the past, but we continue to see how different rules apply to people with different colors of skin. We cannot have religious freedom until we all experience and extend personal freedom.
Join BJC as we work together for faith, freedom for all, in your community and across the nation.
It was great to see so many friends in that video. And just like them, I am proud to support the work of the BJC. If you would like to make a donation to support the work of the BJC, you can do that now by texting BJC to 24365. But now we want to further the conversation, the fantastic conversation based on what Dr. Lewis, Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis shared with us. We want to continue kind of marinating on what she said. My name is Robin Anderson. I am the co-pastor of Commonwealth Baptist Church here in Alexandria, Virginia. I am joined in the studio by two other members of the BJC community. And then Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis is still with us live in New York City. Here in Washington are Reverend Keisha I. Patrick and Dr. Andrew Gardner. Reverend Keisha I. Patrick, Esquire, serves as the youth and young adult pastor at 3rd Street Church of God in Washington, D.C. And she practices law for a federal agency, so she's busy. She's also a 2019 BJC Fellow. Dr. Andrew Gardner is visiting faculty associate in American Religious History at Hartford Seminary. He's also a member of the BJC Board of Directors, and he too is a former BJC intern. Keisha and Andrew, as we begin, we've got lots of responses coming up on social media, but we'll get to those in a minute. First, I want to hear from each of you. What stood out to you the most in Reverend Dr. Lewis's very powerful message to us?
So there are two things that really stood out to me. The first was the reference to Fannie Lou Hamer, who I think we still have so much to learn from, and the reference to her quote, nobody's free until everybody is free. And Dr. Lewis so eloquently said, nobody's free until black folks are free. Because in this country, black folks have always been at the bottom. When other ethnic groups have come and been able to assimilate, we have not. And so no one is free still until black people are free, and I'll say until black women are free. And the other thing that stood out to me is that her whole message beckons you to take a look at Luke chapter 4, where Jesus announced his mission. And if we think about justice, we cannot say that the Bible or that Jesus wasn't about justice, because Jesus stood in the synagogue and he said that he was there to preach the gospel to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to preach liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty those who are oppressed. And so her whole message is in various ways saying these are the people who we need to minister to, who need to be included. And it also took me to Matthew 25, where Jesus said, I'm going to one day come and separate the sheep from the goat. And on what basis will Jesus do that? When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me drink? When I was a stranger, did you take me in? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was in prison, did you come visit me? And so the whole message touched on each of those things that Jesus said he came to do and for which he'll come back and judge us on. And so that's what I was thinking about as she spoke.
Fantastic. What about you, Andrew?
Yeah, this was so great. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Lewis. I think one of the things that struck me, listening to all this and at the end, just watching you put your hands up and say the desire of putting faith and politics together, being such an important message for BJC congregations in particular. That so many of BJC's supporting congregations are white, that have had the option to put faith and politics together when it's convenient, and keep faith and politics apart when it's inconvenient. And so I was struck by how important this message is for BJC congregations in particular, of recognizing that no, our faith is always political, and we have to always recognize that faith and politics are viewed together. And so I think that really stuck out to me as such a great message for BJC and BJC supporters.
And I think white churches tend to be scared of that, right? Scared of the merging faith and politics. As a pastor, what struck me so much was this beautiful image of churches. What could happen if churches would disrupt theology that crushes souls? That image, if that would become our focus, how much could change? Dr. Lewis, what are your responses to us? You've heard kind of what's marinating with the three of us. What would you like to add to that?
First of all, I just want to say it's so interesting to watch myself sitting next to you on the TV. That's just wild. It feels like some kind of sci-fi moment where, hi, I'm kind of here. I'm okay. So for the message of technology, I'm really grateful for those comments. Let me start first with the last one, this idea of theology that crushes souls. I grew up, my mom and dad, I'm going to say became progressive over time. When I first went to seminary, my friend Michael Livingston was like, you were so conservative. Was not, yes, you were. The God that they had given me to love, to fall in love with, was a God of a lot of no, right? Don't have sex before you get married. Don't smoke cigarettes. Don't tell lies. Don't, all the things that are good boundaries, but also another kind of sense of no. And if I'm honest with you, as a child, I thought, well, that just kind of feels like if you don't understand it, it's wrong. It felt that way to me. And so I think a lot of us grew up in churches. Many of us who became pastors grew up in churches where the us-them boundary is very strong and clear. You're good, you're bad, you're straight, you're gay, you're in, you're out. You might even not be able to talk in a pulpit if you're a woman. But all of these theologies designed to sort of discipline us, not disciple us, but discipline us and keep us in line. And where's the love in that? Where's the freedom in that? Where's the joy in that? So I like the idea of disrupting soul-crushing theology, because the little people are listening, the older people are listening. They're just really trying to find a way to move in the world. And if we think God wants to crush souls, why wouldn't we crush souls? If God is violent, why wouldn't we be violent, right? So that I want to start there. I love this idea. I preach with my body, and sitting down preaching means I get my hands. But how could we possibly, and I think both Keisha and Andrew are getting at this, but how could we possibly imagine a gospel that is not political? It's in the scripture. It is true that often the Black church, or I'm going to say Latinx churches, Korean churches, that kind of first generation immigrant church puts community centers and justice and that kind of thing right up front in many ways. And yes, I think, Andrew, it's true that a lot of white people are afraid, but I think a lot of Black churches are afraid to do politics as well. What we're afraid of is if we say the wrong thing, or if we push a button, or if we declare what we think is right, people will leave and they won't give offering and that kind of thing. And the truth is that they will leave and they won't give offering. Some people will leave and won't give offering. And the reason I told the story of what happened at Middle was not to brag at all, but we are 4 times big. We are 4 times larger than we were when I became the pastor. 4 times. In COVID, people joined the church. And I think they joined the church because, in fact, people are thirsty for the gospel. I think they are. I think they're thirsty and hungry for righteousness. And I think they're thirsty and hungry for church that doesn't feel like their friends can't come, that doesn't feel like, that book Unchristian, where they did a study of evangelical white young Christians. Why are we hypocrites? Why do we care about all of these things as opposed to these things? So I think there's something liberating for us as clergy to literally go back to, I'll date myself, those bracelets. What would Jesus do? Not the created master of empire. What would Jesus of Nazareth do? What would Jesus of Nazareth say? And if we're guided by that, I think we'll be freer to be fierce.
So we have just a few minutes left, but there's one thing that I would love for us to touch on. If we're going to kind of dive in a little more with this theology that crushes souls and disrupting that, there's action implied in that. Right. So just yesterday, or this week, Congress made Juneteenth a federal holiday. And there's discussion about what is performative justice. We can't pass a Voting Rights Act. What is active justice? I would love for maybe one or two of you to kind of touch on that. What is active here? What is passive? What does something and what doesn't? What just makes us feel good?
I think active justice is for us to get involved and make sure that everybody has the opportunity to vote, and that these laws that are being put in place under the guise of a very loose, fragile guise of expanding voter rights, that the truth be told about them, that you're going to deny water to people standing in lines, and you're making fewer polling places available in densely populated areas that just happen to be majority Black and majority brown areas. So that's what justice in action looks like, standing up and telling the truth about what's really going on, and encouraging people to not fear that they're going to lose something by other people being included.
That's what we see happening. People fearing the loss of something if everybody is included. And justice makes whole, as Dr. Lewis said. Justice makes whole, and so beginning to see justice as wholeness and not as punishment, or not meaning that for you to get yours, I can't get mine.
Yeah. Andrew, do you have something to add to that?
I think I would say, on one level, symbols are powerful and symbols are important, but I think no piece of legislation ends the work. The work begins once something's passed. This can't be political capital that people used to say, oh, look, well, we have a federal holiday that's Juneteenth. This means there's more work that starts now. This means now that Juneteenth is a federal holiday, there's a lot of white people like myself that have to wrestle with, what does this holiday mean for me? And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to follow this.
Dr. Lewis, we have just a couple of minutes left, so you can respond to this question about Juneteenth, or you can just say whatever you want. What closing thoughts would you like to leave us with today?
I think I'll use a Juneteenth comment to make a closing comment.
Okay.
It's powerful, wonderful, and amazing that we have Juneteenth as a federal holiday. That's correct. And we'll remember that President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation and took, 18 months before those folks heard about it. So there is something about the time, right? There's something about time. And if we want to be people of faith, fiercely free, we are not free. I'll just go back to Fannie Lou Hamer, until everyone's free. We're not saved until everyone's saved. We're not liberated until everyone's liberated. And I think that was the core message of Jesus. He was anointed, back to Keisha, Reverend Keisha's, Luke 4. Good news to the poor. We're all poor if we're not all able to eat. We're all captive if we're not all liberated. We're all blind if we can't see that we're inextricably connected. That our faith is not a private practice. It is not a parachute or a rocket out of earth into heaven when we die. Our faith is about making heaven on earth now.
Amen. Yes.
The scriptures are clear about what that looks like. Let's do that.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Lewis, for being with us. Thank you, Keisha and Andrew, for sharing your reflections, your thoughts. We're so glad and grateful for each of you. So thank you very much. And now we're going to turn and see some of the tweets, some of your own thoughts and reactions to Reverend Dr. Lewis's remarks to us in this conversation. So you can see, let's see, Jamie D. Crumley has tweeted, "We have much to learn from observing how Black Baptist women born in the early 20th century in the South survived in a world that was not built to sustain them. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis, for sharing what you learned while watching your mother." Reverend Darrell R. Hamilton Jr. said, isn't it true, he's quoting, isn't it true that the same electives who voted to make Juneteenth a federal holiday will vote against voting rights, women's rights, trans rights? Elisa tweeted, "White supremacy shackles all of us." Jim Hopkins, "The economy does not help Black families thrive because it was not designed to help Black families thrive. Is this not a theological issue?" Thank you so much for your thoughts, for your comments, for your interaction with this conversation today.
My name is Aurelia, and I am a BJC fellow. I am on the BJC Religious Liberty Council, and I'm also a pastor in Texas who is ordained in the Baptist tradition. Early on in my ministry context, I often felt like I was living in two separate worlds, the world of the Baptist pastor and the world of the concerned citizen. I cared deeply about justice and equity from micro levels all the way from the way policies shape our society as a whole. But I wasn't always sure of my role as ordained clergy. Through the incredible resources and training of the BJC, I became educated and equipped to be an advocate for religious liberty in my community and beyond. And I realized that I have a role to play in the political arena, not despite my being a pastor, but precisely because of it. Then, on January 6th, as our capital was under siege, I watched in horror as countless Christian symbols were brandished by the mobs. And I was reminded of Jesus, who was murdered by an authoritarian state, he himself a victim of mob violence. That day proved what so many of us had long suspected, that Christian nationalism, rooted in white supremacy, has become such a huge threat in our country. And as a faith leader in these anxious times, I am not always sure how to proceed amidst this chaos. And so I am grateful for the guidance and support of the BJC. They work with Congress, in the courts, in the community. They preserve, they inform, they educate. And now, amidst heightened polarity and division in our country, their work is more important than ever. For 85 years, the BJC has been a pole star for all who value religious liberty. Administrations come and go, but the BJC continues in their work to protect religious freedom for all, consistently defending the separation of church and state. This is why I support the BJC, both as a liaison and financially. This is why I will continue to support them for as long as I am able. And it is why I ask you to consider doing the same. Join us in this important work and consider making a gift today.
Thank you, Aurelia, for your testimonial and your support. You and every person on our program today embodies fierce freedom, passionately, honestly, lovingly, boldly, and bravely advocating for everyone's equal claim to faith freedom. We don't read from the same script or speak from the same location. We have witnessed today how there is no one way to talk about religious freedom. Instead, what it means to be free is intensely personal to our experience. What a gift to have so many different testimonials of freedom today. We revel in our diverse experiences and perspectives. We are inspired by how fiercely we live out our freedom. And as we celebrate today and reflect on Baptist Joint Committee's 85 years of advocating for faith freedom for all, we confess and acknowledge that our table has not always been an inclusive place where everyone has been welcomed or made to feel at home. Nor do we claim that today's hour-long program includes every perspective. The call for inclusion is a continuous process and orientation. It's not a destination that we have reached. Today's broadcast is part of a larger effort that we at BJC have undertaken to tell this bold truth. Religious freedom has been white too long. We are exploring how our American conceptions of religious freedom have been limited by an understanding that centers the white experience to the exclusion of others. Whether you are learning about BJC today for the first time, or you have been a part of BJC for decades, I hope you will join us in this next stage of our advocacy. Listen and learn with us. For example, check out our Voices of Faith Freedom series on Facebook Live. BJC Director of Education Charles Watson Jr. is hosting a series of conversations this year about what faith freedom means from a variety of perspectives. You can catch up on the series with recordings available on Facebook and on BJC's website at bjconline.org/Facebook-Live. As Dr. Timothy T. Body shared with us earlier this hour, we at BJC are marking our 85th anniversary by moving faith freedom forward. We sense that 2021 is a pivotal moment in our world and in our work. The past 15 months of global health pandemic and global activism to address racism and structural inequalities have changed us all. We cannot, we will not return to a former way of doing things. How important it is right now, in this fragile and fleeting time, to protect freedom and to do it fiercely. Our advocacy in Congress, in the courts, in the streets, on social media, in our houses of worship and community gathering places must change with our times. What changes do we want to bring about? How can we expand our understanding of faith freedom, decentering the white experience and making space for all perspectives so we can strengthen our understanding of and advocacy for faith freedom? How do we reimagine our mission at the intersection of religious freedom and racial justice? How do we expand our circle of supporters and of influence as we dismantle the myth of the United States as a so-called Christian nation, and in its place help cultivate a faith freedom nation? These are the questions that are animating our work and our vision as we celebrate our 85th anniversary and anticipate what BJC will be when we celebrate our centennial in 2036. My dream is that our organization will be more inclusive, our understanding of faith freedom will be more expansive, and our circle will be wider than it is today. And we want you to be a part of our BJC community as we explore these topics and learn from one another to become even more fierce advocates for freedom in the years to come. Will you join us on this exploration? This year, we are moving faith freedom forward as we have launched BJC's project on race and religious freedom, with a goal of raising $85,000 to seed this work. You can celebrate our 85th year with a special gift of $85 this summer. Your donation allows us to engage with and learn from experts from diverse backgrounds. Your gift will help us create and produce materials and training for churches, educators, and student groups. Your support will go to developing digital resources that you can share with people in your networks to discuss the intersection of race and religious freedom. I want to especially thank again all of today's sponsors who made it possible to make today's program free for all. If you are a sponsor of today's event at our 85th anniversary level or above, don't forget that you are invited to a post-program webinar that will focus on moving faith freedom forward through the eyes of future generations. If you want to attend but haven't sponsored yet, you still can. Just go to bjconline.org/fiercefreedom and click on Sponsor Now. You will receive a link to join us for this special event at your provided email address moments after you submit your donation. Thank you for joining us today and for walking with us on this next stage of BJC's ministry in the world. And now I would like to welcome Reverend Meg Thomas, who will send us out to be fierce advocates for faith freedom.
May you soak in the courage offered to us today, the wisdom to protect faith freedom for all, the radical love necessary to disrupt racism. May you be inspired by it. May we live the fierce freedom that we are challenged to protect. May we proclaim and advocate for all. May we be given the perseverance to continue in this work till all are free. And may the God who is above us, beside us, and within us bless you as you go from this place. Amen.